Welcome to a discussion of analytical essays and what they entail. Most people have learned a little bit about essay writing in high school and through other programs that you may have taken. The basis of most college courses and what you'll be asked to write for essays is an analytical essay. There are many types out there. There are reports, there are comparison papers, there are research papers, and no matter what element you add to it, at its base, most of those also are analytical essays. Analytical essays take a subject matter, analyze it, and break it down in a very specific way. Today, we're going to talk about the appropriate tone, structure, introduction, as well as conclusion that you should use to write most, if not all, of the essays that you write in college. There are some basic layout rules. We're not encouraged to be creative with our essay writing at college. Most instructors want all of the essays to look the same. So we want you to use Times New Roman as your font choice in all of your papers. We're going to want you to use a size 12 font, and we're going to want you to double space. And you might ask, why? Why can't I use Calibri? Why can't I make a smaller font? Why can't I just single space? Well, there's a few reasons. First, Times New Roman is easier for instructors to read because it's a serif font. It has the little knobs on the ends. So it's easier on our eyes. It's easier on your eyes too. Size 12 font allows us to assign page lengths to you, as well as it is kind of the best font to read. It's a universal standard size. Please don't play with font in order to fill a page limit. Your instructors can tell, and really, if you're not filling the page limit, it's up to you, the student, to figure out why not. And usually that's a content problem and a writing problem, not a font problem. Double spacing. Well, we want you to double space because we want to be able to comment in between the lines of your writing. We want to be able to edit your words, to provide suggestions, to cross things out, and to show you how you can improve. And we can't do that if you only hand things in single-spaced. Generally speaking, there are some standard rules for academic essays across the board. The first one is avoiding the use of the first person, I. As much as humanly possible, avoid I. You're going to want to give the illusion of objectivity. Second, you're going to want to use present tense as much as humanly possible. You're going to want to use active language, and you're going to want to use a formal tone, which also includes avoiding the use of contractions. Let's take a closer look at this. Why avoid I? Well, as I just said, you want to remove the personal from the essay. You want to make it look as though you're being absolutely objective, or at least give the impression of the goal of objectivity. Most instructors know that you're probably writing from a particular perspective, but we still want you to try and bring out that academic tone. You want to let the research speak for itself as much as possible, and it also adds to a tone of formality. In your writing, you also want to make sure you're writing in the present tense as much as possible. The only exception to this would be if you're writing for a history class. All of the events in history have happened in the past, so you want to write it in the past. In an English class, even if you're reading and writing about Jane Austen in the 1800s and you're now writing about one of the novels, you're writing about the action of the novel as though it's happening right now, in the present, today, because you're reading it now in the present, today. So you want to make your writing sound like it's very much in the here and now in order to give that feeling of immediacy If you are doing or adding some research that demands the past tense, it's certainly acceptable to do that for that piece where you are talking in the past tense, but otherwise you want to keep it in the present. You also want to make sure you're using active language as much as possible. Many students, in an effort to fill their pages, try and use as many words as humanly possible and to sound formal, and they usually, as a result, end up using the passive voice. Because the passive voice is wordier and it takes up more space, right? But it's also confusing and vague, because if you continue to say things like the dog was hit, the novel was written, Austin was good, if you keep saying things like that, we don't have really an understanding of what's going on because there's information missing. The dog was hit. Well, the dog was hit by what? By a car? By a stick? It leads to very vague, wordy, frustrating language. You also want to avoid words like could, should, would, might. Your instructors will want to see that you've come to some conclusions about what you've read. So avoid words like that. So we want you to use the active voice. And what the active voice means is we want you to put the subject doing the action at the beginning of your sentences. For example, the car hit the dog. Several people often argue, well, adding passive sentences to an essay can help mix up the language, and that's very true. If you had said the dog was hit by the car, it would be clearer. However, it's also a little bit more passive sounding, and you do want to avoid that. You want to make sure your tone is formal rather than informal. When we're speaking in an informal way, we're writing with lots of slang, lots of contractions, lots of I's, and the like. What you want is very much to keep your writing as formal as possible. In this example, my dog isn't good at meeting weirdos on the street. She freaks out and her hair rises on her back. It looks like she'll bite your hand clean off, but she actually wouldn't hurt a fly. A lot of that language we wouldn't use in a formal essay, mostly because academia assumes that you're going to take your essay and publish it in a different language. So they want you to use language that's very clear, very concise, and doesn't use slang and jargon as much as possible. This is because if you translate something like, the character was wearing a wife beater. Now, most of us kind of know what that means. He's wearing like a sleeveless t-shirt, right? A white sleeveless t-shirt is commonly called a wife beater. If you just translated wife beater into Japanese, a Japanese person wouldn't be able to understand what you meant. So, keep out words and phrases like that. Sometimes they're quite difficult to catch, but if you're ever wondering, just imagine what it would be like to translate it into a different language. That paragraph written formally is very different. My dog is not good at meeting strange men on the street. She starts to bark and growl, and the hair on her back rises up. You can see between the two that there's actually a lot more detail in the formal one, because in the formal, I've had to take out all of that slang and be really specific about what I'm talking about. So in taking out vague words like thing, something, anything, weirdo, I end up becoming a lot more specific with my language. Contractions are also to be avoided in formal language. We want to make sure that we are spelling out all words. This again adds to a tone of formality. When we have that tone of formality, it might sound awkward at first. The main character did not work at school. Sounds a little bit more tense, right? However, it is more formal, and that's what we're aiming for. Just make sure that you're not just taking out random apostrophes. Sometimes we need these apostrophes to show possession. Other common issues. Thing. Don't use the word thing. Always be specific. There are very few instances in academic writing where you absolutely cannot choose any other word but thing. So be very careful. Don't play with the font and margins in order to make page length. Make sure that you avoid using the author's first names. In any paper you write, you're going to refer to an author, particularly in an English class, Jane Austen, for example. You'll refer to her as Jane Austen in the introduction, and thereafter, you'll just refer to her as Austen. Students will often try and fill space by using the full title of the article or novel repeatedly when it's not necessary as well. Again, in the introduction, you use the full title, and then in the body of the paper, you're just going to refer to the novel that you've chosen as the novel, or Austen's work, or something like that. You're going to use the author's first name only in the introduction, as I mentioned previously. You can also avoid using only your or your instructor's first name in essays. When you put your name in the top left-hand corner of your essay, always make sure it's your name in full. I appreciate that you're being casual with me. However, it is common and good form to use your first and last name on the front page of your essay.